Hey everybody, Greg Berninger, Ghent town historian. Today's trip into Ghent history, we're going to start taking on the biggest topic there is in Ghent history, farming. And we've come over here to extreme West Ghent. We're on the town line between Stockport and Ghent. And this is very likely where the first farming in Ghent took place. Now, while there are no documented settlements, wigwams of Mohican Indians in Ghent, it's pretty likely that at some point some Mohicans engaged in some agriculture in the town of Ghent. Now, it's likely that this is where it could have happened, right? So the Mohicans got most of their food from nature, primarily fish from the Hudson River, acorns, hunting, deer were plentiful. But what agriculture they did engage in would have been the classic beans, squash, and corn, the three sisters. So probably the earliest agriculture in Ghent were Mohicans. And of course their goal was what every farmer's goal has been, at least partially, from the Mohicans right up through, maybe not so much today, but right up till at least World War II. The main reason farmers farmed was to get enough food to eat so that they wouldn't die, right? It's that simple, right? To create enough food for themselves so that they wouldn't die. And then beyond that, of course, there would have been a crop, an animal that they would have been raising to make a profit from. And the first cash crop that farmers in Ghent likely, again I say likely a lot, especially early on, because we're taking statistics, we're taking knowledge, general knowledge about the region and applying it to Ghent, even though we may not know specifically what happened in a specific spot in Ghent. But anyway, that first crop would have been something I don't think anyone in Ghent has grown in a long time: wheat. In the 1700s, the Hudson Valley was the breadbasket for America and beyond. Much of what we know about the history of farming in Columbia County comes from the eminent Conrad Vispo, who has written a great deal, researched a great deal, produced wonderful graphs and maps. Conrad Vispo works at the Farmscape Ecology Program at the other end of Ghent on the Hawthorne Valley Farm. So many thanks to him and his staff for producing great work on the history and the present use of land in Columbia County. Now, in 1789, historians estimate Columbia County produced 190,000 bushels of wheat, far more than people in the county could eat. So much of that was exported down the river to New York City and beyond. Much wheat from Columbia County wound up in the West Indies, Cuba, Haiti, St. Martin, the Caribbean. And what came back from that part of the world was sugar, rum, and enslaved people. Whether those enslaved people ever wound up here in West Ghent, who knows? But I do know from recent research of my own that 24% of the people in a 7 square mile area, beginning here and going east, think Meadow Greens Golf Course, Shadow 66 Restaurant, Columbia County Airport, and a little further east. In 1790, 24% of the people living here were enslaved. That's a huge number. Claverick, which this was part of at the time, was around 11%. Kinderhook, just north of here, if memory serves me right, was about 16%. So this was a very concentrated area of enslaved people working this very dirt that I'm holding in my hand in 1790. That's almost 1 out of 4 people. So that's, in raw numbers, that's 23 enslaved people and 73 white family members. And this is 10 household sample that I researched. So 9 out of 10 households in this area had slaves. So how does an enslaved person or the farmer, him or herself, go about raising wheat? Well, First you have to, like you probably already know, till up the soil a little bit. They would have had a sort of a broad wooden frame with spikes that came down, and you would drag that over the soil to work it up. Farmer would go through, broadcast the wheat seed, hope for some good sun and some just enough rain, and then when the wheat was ready for harvest, go through with a sieve or a scythe and cut it, you know, one of those. Very hard work. That's why you didn't have to have Planet Fitness in 1790. Cutting, and then the men and the women would be out in the field gathering what was cut. It would be taken to the barn where it would be flailed, right? A flail, think of maybe two wooden handles attached with a leather strap, maybe a chain, and you would flail on the wheat, and you would separate the kernels, the seeds from that. So on the floor of the barn, you would wind up, once you remove the stalk, the straw, you wind up with the seeds. And there you have to separate the husk. And that's already semi-separated from the flailing. So you might have a machine, or you'd have a winnowing basket. It's a very wide, shallow basket that looks like a big scoop. And you would scoop up what was left on the floor, gently toss it into the air, hoping for a light breeze, and that breeze would blow away the husk, and you would be left with the little piece of grain. You can't make that into bread. That then has to be milled. That's why I'm almost certain a lot of wheat would have been grown in this field, because very close by was one of the earliest mills in the area along Fitting Creek, operated by Andreas Dingman. So West Ghent would have been a great area to grow wheat, and you can see by the homes, very substantial homes for the 1700s, 3 of which are still here. One on Gilligan Road, I call it the Leggett House, more recently inhabited by the Gilligan family, and the Skinkle House, which is the house across from Shadow 66, and the house on Old Mill Road, which is where the mill was. So 3 of those homes, not enormous, but substantial, indicate wealth here. And of course, the fact that there were 24 people owned over here also indicates a great deal of wealth. So what happened to the wheat industry? Well, wheat is tough on the soil, and farmers would have to switch up crops. That, along with the fact that the Erie Canal gets finished around in the 1820s, and wheat can then be easily brought in from western New York and eventually the midwestern part of America. Wheat is pretty much not raised at all. In 1850, so 1850, 60 years after 1790, math, how about that? There are many, many, many more farmers in Columbia County. In 1850, 9,000 bushels of wheat were harvested, as opposed to 190,000 in 1790. So very likely Ghent's first cash crop raised here was wheat. So now you're wondering, has Berninger finally lost his mind? What's he sitting on the edge of a woods for a video about farming? Well, guess what? This is what a lot of Ghent farms look like now. The last 50 years, there's been a great reforestation in Ghent, Columbia County, in fact, much of the eastern seaboard. Much of the land has gone back to nature after being cleared for hundreds of years for agriculture. And we know this because in Ghent history, we've talked about this before. When you look at old photos of churches and schools, you see a complete absence of trees, and you go to that spot today, and it looks like this. 1875, the New York State Census is a cornucopia, a real bounty of information about farms. A tremendous amount of farm statistics about every farm in Ghent and all over for 1875. And I selected the Groat farm here in Omai because it's very typical. There's nothing extraordinary about it whatsoever. But of course, it's the people that matter most. And here are the people, and I say people because here's the problem. when you say to most folks today, picture a farmer, you probably picture a white man on a tractor. Well, that's good, but there's a lot more than that throughout today and throughout history. We already talked about farmers who were enslaved in West Ghent. And certainly in the 1870s, although slavery is long gone out of Ghent, you have the entire family being engaged in farming. So yeah, picture a man with a plow and a horse, picture a woman churning butter, picture kids doing whatever the kids were able to do, maybe a hired man who lived in a house on the property. So the farm family, everybody was engaged in, again, producing enough calories to survive the winter and also some commodities to sell. So the Edward Groat farm, Edward and Anna Groat farm of 1875, we have Anna Groat, age 50, Edward Groat, age 55, daughter Anna, age 30, son John, 28, his wife Estella, also 28, grandmother Hannah, 86, and I don't know, Sarah Hiscox, an English teenager, 17 years old, living on the farm. There's another mystery I need to figure out. But here we have a nice typical farm family, a mix of men and women to divide up the work and enough help to keep things going. And you can sort of see the pattern, right? You can see the pattern here. We have a multi-generational household. And of course, you know, 2 parents and kids in a house is a very modern post-World War II invention in America. Here you have the multi-generational family household. And as the older folks age out, can't work and die, the younger generation takes on the work and the older folks become supported by them, and that's how you have multi-generational family farms. But anyway, let's get to the details here of the Groat farm. Very typical. 110 acres of improved land. 30 acres of what was called unimproved land. 15 acres of that was wooded. You need a lot of wood to burn, to cook with, to heat in the winter. Cash value of farm, $10,000. Farm buildings, $800. Stock, $800. Tools and implements, $250. Gross sales from farm, $1,874. Let's stop. People, think of the skill set that you needed to be a farmer in this time period and even today. You needed to be somewhat of a builder to maintain your buildings. You needed to understand animals for the stock. You needed to be a mechanic to take care of your tools and implements, and you needed to be a business person for the sales. Not only that, you needed, well, I guess what we call soft skills today. You needed to get along well with your neighbors, because guess what? If Anna breaks her arm and can't churn the butter, or the father twists an ankle and can't plow the field, you need your neighbors to help out, and you need to be helping them out as well. Tons of hay, 25. Now that would have come from 15 acres that were in pasture. There were 20 acres in meadow, that's where animals would graze, and there were 27 acres that were plowed. Tons of hay produced, I said 25. Acres sown in oats, 20, producing 200 bushels of oats. Winter rye, 26 acres. Buckwheat, 4 acres. Acres in Indian corn, 4, and acres in potatoes, 3, producing 150 bushels of potatoes. That's a lot of potatoes, right? Potatoes are great, like carrots, like turnips, rutabaga, winter squash. That's what would give you those all-important calories, say, in the month of February when you're not harvesting anything. Knowing how to preserve those was an essential farm skill. 20 apple trees producing 30 bushels of apples, which the best way to preserve apples is cider, hard or otherwise, and they had 2 barrels of cider. Heifer calf, 1, that's a cow before it's given birth, not producing milk yet. 6 milk cows, 5 horses, 10 pigs producing 1,200 pounds of pork, that's slaughtering 6 of them. Sheep, 20, producing 400 pounds of wool. Lambs, 15, poultry value, $20. Nice variety of items, right? Some years, as you know, even if you have a vegetable garden, you know, some years, some things do better than others, depending upon the weather. You know, commodity prices change, so you want to have a multitude of crops. So there's your classic late 1800s farm, the Groat farm over here on letter S Road. And I think if anything, and I already alluded to this, it demonstrates the tremendous knowledge that a farm family needed. You're not going to the store and buying your butter. You're raising the hay and the crops to feed your cow that needed to be milked. And then that butter had to be churned. 600 pounds of butter was produced on the Groat farm. Again, butter without refrigeration keeps a lot better than milk does. So one of the worst phrases I think in our vernacular is dumb farmer. Any farmer succeeding in 1875 was a whole lot smarter than a college professor, town historian with a master's degree in English. The variety of things that you needed to know to be a farmer was incredible. And you can read all the books you want about it today. You can look at people's diaries and scratch the surface of what went into surviving and building some wealth by selling some of your products. Folks, we've just scratched the surface today, right? We've made 2 stops. The sun has come up, as you could tell in the video here. I got up early to work on these videos. And we're going to wrap up this first part of the history of agriculture in Ghent. But there's a lot more to cover, and hopefully by the end of the summer we'll have covered as much as possible. But as I said, we're just scratching the surface. This could be a 12-hour Ken Burns film for that matter. So we'll see you next time for future segments about the history of farming in Ghent.